Welcome to Taste of Revenge. If you're into cold revenge and dark justice, hit that subscribe and like button. This story will haunt you.
My name is Lucas. I'm 38 years old, and for 17 years I lived to work. Not in the cliché way, not like a humble brag on some resume. I mean it literally. My entire identity, every relationship, every plan, every second of my time was shaped by one obsession: becoming the youngest executive partner at Hawthorne Strategic. I sacrificed sleep, relationships, even my own health, and I was damn close, until they stabbed me in the back. But we'll get there. You have to understand what this company meant to me. Hawthorne wasn't just a job. It was my cathedral. A sleek tower in the heart of Chicago, where brilliance was worshipped and weakness hunted like prey. I started as an intern at 21. No connections, no nepotism, just raw obsession. Within 5 years, I was managing million-dollar accounts. At 30, I was overseeing entire divisions. I was a rising legend, the kind of guy the board whispered about in elevator rides. But power has gravity, and the higher I climbed, the more I felt it pulling. Not just pulling me up, but dragging others down. My downfall began with a chair. A leather-backed Herman Miller chair, to be precise, with my name engraved on a silver plate. Partner. That title was meant to be mine. I'd worked for it, I'd earned it. Hell, I'd bled for it. And when the board announced a new opening, I was the clear frontrunner. At least, I thought I was. Enter Malcolm Pierce, a smooth-talking legacy hire, with perfect teeth, a perfect family, and a perfectly sharpened knife aimed at my back. He played the game differently. While I was burning midnight oil, Malcolm was burning cigars with board members. While I buried myself in strategy decks, he buried secrets in smiles. And I was blind to it. The sabotage was subtle at first. Files misplaced, clients reassigned, projects mysteriously derailed right before quarterly reviews. I didn't see the pattern until it was too late. Then came the audit. An anonymous tip had flagged irregularities in one of my financial reports. Bullshit, of course. But the audit was brutal. They suspended me pending investigation, seized my access, and froze my promotion. And just like that, the future I'd spent half my life building cracked like glass. But the final blow came from someone I trusted. Naomi, my assistant, my shadow. I had mentored her, protected her, pulled her out of obscurity. And yet, there she was, smiling nervously beside Malcolm as the board announced his promotion. The world didn't end that day, it just got quiet. I spent the next month in my apartment, staring at a blank wall. The corporate world moved on without me. Nobody called, no letters, no thank you, just silence. And in that silence, something snapped. This wasn't just a career setback, this was execution. Premeditated, coordinated, personal. So I made a choice, not to move on, not to heal. I chose revenge. But I'm not a thug. I didn't burn their cars or slash their tires. I did what I was trained to do: strategize, dissect, manipulate systems until they bent to my will. You see, Hawthorne's greatest strength was its data. Everything ran on systems. Contracts, payments, internal messaging, server access, client files. And thanks to years of late-night build-outs, I knew every digital artery that kept that beast alive. All I needed was access. Which brings me to Darren Liu. Darren was a third-year analyst, quiet, awkward, terrified of Malcolm, but brilliant. The kind of coder who could rewrite payroll systems in his sleep. I'd given him his start, and he still admired me. Blindly. So when I invited him for coffee under the guise of catching up, he showed up early and eager. I played the broken man well, told him I was consulting now, said I just needed some old files for reference. He hesitated. Barely. Then he slipped me his credentials. Just for a day, he said. I nodded, smiled, promised I'd delete everything after. I lied. That night, I slipped into Hawthorne's system like a ghost. I copied files, downloaded archives, Found the hidden trails Malcolm and Naomi thought they'd buried forever. Emails, calendar invites, confidential memos. The whole ugly conspiracy laid bare in front of me. But I didn't release it. Not yet. Revenge isn't just about justice. It's about control, and control requires patience. Instead, I created an alias, Aegis, an anonymous insider claiming to be a current employee. I began leaking minor stories to industry blogs. Stories about workplace abuse, about misallocated funds, about silent layoffs that violated federal labor laws. The press ran with it. Investors flinched. But Malcolm? He stood firm, wearing his smile like armor. So I pierced it. I fabricated a whistleblower complaint to the SEC, using real files to frame Malcolm for insider trading. It was airtight. Not because it was real, but because the trail was so believable. By the time Malcolm figured out he was being set up, it was too late. His accounts were frozen. His lawyer quit. The board placed him on administrative leave pending investigation. Naomi tried to cover for him, but I had emails showing her collusion. She was done in days. But that wasn't the end, not even close. Because while they scrambled to contain the fire, I lit another. It wasn't long before I realized that my downfall hadn't been a spontaneous, unfortunate series of misunderstandings. It had been a coordinated strike. Every missing file, every miscommunicated deadline, every meeting I was mysteriously left out of. It was all calculated, deliberate. I remember the day I found the proof. It was a Wednesday. I had stayed late to finish up quarterly projections. The building was mostly dark, save for the occasional desk lamp or the dull glow of a forgotten monitor. My fingers moved on autopilot, tired but mechanical, until I opened a shared drive that wasn't meant for me. A misnamed folder, tucked deep in a web of financial archives. I clicked. And there it was. Screenshots of internal messages, a Slack thread between Jared, Claire, and 2 others. They mocked me, called me old man, said I was dead weight the company needed to shed, talked about how they'd restructure my department by feeding HR a timeline of fabricated incompetence. There were even timestamps showing that they had deleted meeting invites from my calendar on purpose. Not accidentally, on purpose. My chest went cold. It was betrayal in its purest form. These weren't just colleagues. I had trained Jared when he joined. I had defended Claire when her data model crashed during her presentation. And now, they had spent months cutting the legs out from under me, with the precision of surgeons and the glee of children kicking over sandcastles. I downloaded everything. Then I sat back, breathing slow, the room spinning. I felt like I was watching myself from outside my own body. My first instinct was to confront them, send an email, forward the evidence to HR. But then I remembered HR was in on it. Jessica, the HR director, had never looked me in the eyes during the entire investigation. Her questions were cold, mechanical. She had already decided I was guilty before the first meeting began. I closed my laptop slowly. This wouldn't be solved with a complaint. This was war. The next morning, I began my new job. Same office, same desk, same coffee. But I was no longer Isaac the employee. I was Isaac the saboteur. I started small, quietly. I memorized passwords. I learned who used what servers, and which folders were synced to the cloud, and which were only stored locally. I noted who printed what documents and which interns always forgot to log out of their terminals. I studied the system. Every day I smiled. Every day I played the fool. And every night, I built my plan. They thought they'd humiliated me. They thought the story ended with me packing up a cardboard box and leaving with my head down. But they'd given me something far more dangerous than shame. They'd given me time and access. They didn't fire me immediately. Legal needed time to, quote, finalize the package. They wanted a clean exit, not a wrongful termination lawsuit. So while the lawyers deliberated, I remained. Weeks passed. I planted code, Nothing destructive yet, just observation scripts, keyloggers on their terminals, mirror folders in the backup servers. I knew what they typed, when they typed it, and who they sent it to. It was like standing in the walls of a house, listening to every conversation. I learned their secrets. Jared was leaking internal documents to a competitor, Startivate, a mid-level rival we'd edged out in last year's Q3 campaign. Claire had doctored client deliverables to hide missed deadlines. Jessica, the HR director? She had a side deal with a consulting firm, funneling laid-off employees into her friend's startup for a cut. They were all rotten. The company wasn't just corrupted at the top. It was diseased through the middle. I didn't plan to burn it down. I planned to carve it open. Surgically, publicly. And I had just the plan. The first domino had to fall silently. I started with Claire. I had a mirror of her entire desktop. Every document, every email, every poorly thought-out message typed in a rush. I compiled a folder of altered timelines, falsified vendor signatures, and a draft proposal she never sent that could have saved a contract we lost because she forgot. I sent it anonymously to legal and CC'd the board. Subject: Urgent Compliance Breach, Claire H. Confidential. The email was cold, clinical, loaded with exact timestamps and direct file links hosted from a private WeTransfer with a disappearing link. By the next morning, Claire's desk was empty. No goodbye, no LinkedIn post, just a whisper that HR had escorted her out with a box of personal items and a face pale as ash. That was step one. Now I knew the timing, the system. Once one piece of the facade cracked, the rest would follow, if pressured correctly. Next was Jared. His betrayal was more venomous. Selling out company strategy to Startivate was a felony under NDA and trade secret law. But I didn't want him fired. I wanted him exposed. I drafted a fake internal report, made to look like a confidential email from a Startivate exec, thanking Jared for the materials. I used the metadata style from his real emails to make it believable. Then I sent it from an untraceable burner account to our CTO and the chairman of the board. Jared didn't even get to clear his desktop. Security walked him out like a criminal. But not before I deleted every trace of my own involvement. No breadcrumbs, no fingerprints, no digital trail. And the best part? The whole company believed it was justice. They never suspected it was revenge. With my enemies gone, it would have been easy to walk away. But that was never the point. They took my identity. They made me feel powerless. Now I would make them feel something far worse. Helplessness, as the system unraveled from within. My next target was the infrastructure itself. Not sabotage, not destruction. Chaos. I rewrote automated processes, subtly. Delivery schedules started to slip. Invoices doubled. Access permissions bounced from user to user like a game of hot potato. No one could figure out why. They blamed the interns, then the IT vendor. No one thought to blame the invisible man behind the curtain. That's the benefit of being underestimated. By week 5, morale was disintegrating. People whispered about layoffs. Clients stopped responding to emails. The board scrambled for explanations. And then came the final blow. I leaked everything. Not to the press. Not to the authorities. To the employees. Every manipulation. Every cover-up. Every bonus Claire had taken from team funds. Every shady side deal Jared made. Jessica's HR betrayal. Even the doctored performance reviews they used to remove me. I wrote a manifesto. Anonymous, elegant, factual. Titled, "The Truth You Were Never Meant to See." I attached documents. I included Slack screenshots. And I sent it to every employee inbox at 9:01 a.m. on a Monday. The office froze. Phones stopped ringing. Meetings were canceled. The CEO didn't come in. Half the staff walked out by lunch. It was beautiful. No fire. No screaming. Just silence. Pop. And collapse. A week later, the company filed for emergency restructuring. By the time they traced anything remotely suspicious, I was already gone. I had already withdrawn every document, wiped every trace of my digital footprint, and quietly moved to a new city with a consulting job and a story no one would ever hear, except now. They called me a disgrace. They tried to erase my name. But I didn't just get even. I rewrote the ending. I didn't celebrate. There was no champagne, no smug grin in the mirror, no late-night victory dance with the city skyline behind me. Only quiet. I sat alone that night on the floor of my one-bedroom apartment, lights off, screen glowing, watching the company's LinkedIn page update. CEO statement. We are initiating a full internal audit after recent developments. Our priority is rebuilding trust. Empty words from a collapsing house of cards. But I wasn't done yet. Because this wasn't just about justice. It was about restoration. Of my dignity, my name, my future. They had taken years from me, I would take years from them. And I had one more move left. Jessica. She'd moved on quickly. New firm, new title, glowing press release about her leadership skills and integrity. I read it with a smirk. She didn't know I was watching. Jessica was smart, but she was lazy with her passwords. I still had access to her personal cloud, photos, drafts, notes. I found a voice memo, late at night, clearly meant as a journal entry. Maybe she'd intended to delete it. Maybe she forgot. I still think about what we did to Isaac, she whispered, her voice low and shaky. He didn't deserve it, but we were scared. He was too good. Jared said it was the only way. That was all I needed. I cleaned the audio, removed background noise, filtered it for clarity. Then I sent it to her new employer. No subject, just a single line in the email body. Leadership starts with accountability. She resigned that week. No one knew why. No statement, no explanation. She just disappeared. And with her, the last echo of their conspiracy. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt still. Like the moment after a storm, when the air is heavy but the wind has stopped. I'd finally reclaimed control. But revenge, it doesn't give you back what you lost. It only burns down what they built on top of it. Weeks passed, then months. I started fresh. New city, new name, unofficially. I didn't change my identity, but I changed the story people heard when I spoke. I worked quietly, consulting for tech firms and legal teams. Risk audits, digital privacy, corporate compliance. Irony, maybe. But I was good at finding cracks in systems, because I knew exactly how to make them. And then one day, nearly a year later, I got a message. An unknown number. We know what you did. Let's talk. I froze. No name, no details. Just that. I checked every account, every cloud folder. No breach, no signs of being tracked. Still, something felt wrong. I ignored it. A day later, another message. If you're going to tear down companies, you might as well get paid for it. This time, a name was attached. It was a startup, niche cybersecurity, focused on corporate defense. The CEO was a ghost. Someone I'd seen once at a conference, a former intelligence analyst turned entrepreneur. She wanted me to consult, not to stop sabotage, to build it. Legally. Controlled dismantling of internal threats, simulated attacks, hostile audits, to see if a company could survive betrayal. She didn't know everything I'd done, but she'd read between the lines. I told her I'd think about it, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in the dark. Maybe vengeance was just step one. Maybe this wasn't an ending. Maybe it was a beginning. I accepted her offer, but with conditions. No real names, no paper trail, and no access to my past. I would be a shadow, just like the threat they were paying me to simulate. They called me the ghost in the firewall. My job was to pretend I was the enemy, infiltrate their systems, study employee behavior, test internal trust, and then report back before anything real happened. It was thrilling. I didn't just test their tech, I tested their people. I'd plant fake memos, simulate data breaches, create controlled chaos to see who would panic, who would leak, who would lie, who would lead. Each time I watched a manager turn on their team or a board member start spinning their version of the story, I saw pieces of my old company again. I saw Jared, Jessica, the cowardice behind power. And it reminded me how fragile everything really was. Power is a house built on secrets. I had learned how to find the cracks. Now I was being paid to press on them, gently, surgically, until one day, I got a client I recognized. Apex Dynamics. Jessica's new employer after she resigned. A top-tier firm with a reputation for aggressive expansion and brutal internal politics. They didn't know I had taken down one of their senior recruits. They just wanted someone to test their defenses. I said yes. But not for the money. For closure. I started slow. A small audit, employee behavior analysis, background checks. Then, I noticed something odd. A pattern in internal emails. Code words repeated across departments. Financial transfers just below the audit threshold. It looked familiar. Too familiar. A buried system of controlled sabotage. They weren't just vulnerable. They were replicating the exact model that destroyed me years ago. Only this time, it was weaponized. It wasn't one rogue executive. It was policy. They'd built a machine that systematically burned out employees after extracting their best ideas. Every innovation went through a review board that filtered credit to senior leadership. Every promotion path was rigged with unreachable metrics. HR complaints were routed to a quote, 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 quote. That never replied. A slow, quiet bleed of talent, all hidden behind sleek branding and hollow speeches about resilience. They weren't a company. They were a factory of ghosts. People like me, who had given everything and left with nothing. I had two choices. Take the paycheck, write a soft report, and move on. Or bring it down. Again. Only this time I wouldn't do it alone. I started reaching out. Carefully. Anonymously. Former employees. Disgruntled contractors. Quiet resignations listed on LinkedIn with vague captions. On to the next chapter. Time to focus on family. The digital language of silent suffering. I found a few who were willing to talk. One had been a whistleblower, buried by legal threats. Another had developed a product that Apex launched under a different name with someone else as creator. I connected the dots. I built a timeline. I created a dossier, clean, professional, legal, every page backed by receipts, screenshots, statements. And then I made a decision I hadn't made in years. I signed my real name on the final page. Isaac Lorne. Because this time, I didn't want to be a ghost. I wanted them to know who came for them. I didn't submit the dossier right away. Instead, I waited. I needed to know if Apex had changed, or if Jessica had brought the disease with her. Turns out, she didn't just bring it, she perfected it. Jessica was now Vice President of Strategic Culture, a made-up title. Her real job? Silencing dissent with a smile. She ran programs like Resilience Realignment and Feedback Acceleration Units, all fluffy names for controlled manipulation. Instead of firing underperformers, she let them destroy themselves through impossible expectations. She weaponized HR-turned-culture into control. I still remembered how she used to smile when someone cried in a meeting. She always said, if they break here, they'd break out there. And now, she'd built an empire on that same logic. I watched her conduct webinars, giving speeches about mental health and innovation, while her team quietly erased the people who made that innovation possible. It was exactly the kind of hypocrisy that took me down. But this time, I wasn't alone. My network had grown. One of my new allies, Camilla, had once run Apex's internal survey platform. She still had backdoor access. Another, Darren, had been in product R&D. Apex stole his designs, erased his access, and labeled him incompatible with brand values. They took his ideas, destroyed his reputation, and threatened to sue if he spoke up. He never got closure. Until now. Together we formed a plan. We didn't want to just leak the dossier that would be dismissed. We wanted to bury Apex in the only place that mattered to them. Their own reputation score. They had a fragile relationship with a government-funded initiative, a program that relied on quarterly ethics audits. If those audits failed, Apex would lose millions in subsidies and access to exclusive federal contracts. We didn't have to break in. We just had to tell the truth. But in a way, Apex couldn't spin. We created a ghost startup called Echo North Solutions, built a mock business model that mirrored Apex's weaknesses, designed to look like competition. Then, we pitched Apex internal staff through LinkedIn. Within 72 hours, 4 mid-level managers leaked sensitive complaints about their own company, trying to jump ship. We had screenshots, messages, timestamp replies. That was phase 1. Phase 2 was riskier. We needed to turn their own systems against them. Camilla activated her dormant admin access. She didn't steal data. That would have been illegal. She just redirected it. Survey results about burnout and morale were no longer sent to Jessica's sanitized dashboard. They were sent directly to Apex's federal compliance portal. 100% unfiltered. And suddenly, they had a problem. Because now, their culture metrics showed a 67% decline in psychological safety, 42% employee attrition risk, and documented instances of leadership retaliation. This wasn't sabotage. This was truth. Unedited, untamed, unspinnable. Apex was bleeding in public. And they didn't even know where the cut was. Jessica reacted exactly as I predicted. She fired the compliance officer, then the head of culture analytics. Then she launched an internal investigation to find the mole. She didn't realize I wasn't inside. I was outside, with a view of the whole machine. While she tore apart her own ranks, I quietly submitted the dossier to the Federal Business Integrity Board. Signed, sealed, backed by former employees and time-stamped evidence. Apex Dynamics was flagged for investigative suspension. Their contracts were frozen. Their name hit the industry news cycle. Suddenly, Jessica stopped smiling. But it wasn't enough. She still had her position. Still gave interviews about challenges and learnings. So I leaked the final piece. An old video. Back when she still worked with me. In that meeting. The one where she smiled while Jared humiliated me. Where she said nothing, did nothing, just sat there. Except this time, I added the context. I explained what happened after. How she was promoted 2 weeks later. How Jared listed her as a partner in innovation. The truth was ugly. People listened. Not because I begged them to, but because I laid it bare. No hashtags. No hashtags. Just the wreckage. Jessica disappeared from Apex's public channels after the leak. No more webinars, no more press. Rumor inside the company was she'd taken a leave of absence, stress, burnout, personal reasons. But I knew better. She was retreating, calculating, figuring out how to spin this into another redemption arc. That was her specialty. Collapse, cry, rebrand. But this time, the stage was scorched. Apex's board hired external investigators. Clients pulled out quietly. One partner released a vague statement about reputational concerns and a commitment to integrity. But the real blow came from within. One of the mid-level managers we baited with Echo North, a guy named Patrick, flipped. He sent us a 36-page PDF titled, "Just in Case." Inside were internal memos, PowerPoint decks, meeting notes with timestamps, all tying Jessica and 2 other execs to the manipulation of survey results, going back 6 quarters. They'd been building a false culture profile for over a year to maintain funding. That was fraud. And once the board saw it, Jessica's leave of absence became permanent. She didn't go down quietly, of course. She posted a 9-minute video on LinkedIn, black and white, soft piano music, tearful eyes. She talked about the burden of leadership, the pain of betrayal, and how she'd been, quote, targeted by coordinated misinformation from malicious forces. It had all the right hashtags. Hashtag leadership journey. Hashtag women in power. Hashtag healing starts now. And in the comments, the same people she crushed wrote, "We support you." But no one believed it. The video didn't go viral, it got buried. Because for once, her narrative wasn't stronger than the facts. I watched her fall in silence. I didn't need to respond. I didn't need to dance on the grave. Revenge isn't about noise. It's about balance. But then, something strange happened. Apex offered me a job. Not publicly, quietly, through a recruiter. Director of People Operations. The irony nearly made me laugh out loud. Camilla was furious. Darren wanted me to take it just to burn it from the inside. Patrick warned me it might be bait, some twisted attempt to settle or silence me. But I already knew what I had to do. I said yes. And 3 weeks later, I walked through the same lobby where I'd once been labeled a disgrace. Same sterile walls, same glass offices. But everything felt different now, because I wasn't coming to belong. I was coming to build the thing they pretended to be. My first act as director? I reinstated everyone Apex had let go under culture alignment reasons. Second, I launched a fully anonymous, decentralized reporting system, one even I couldn't trace, and I made sure everyone knew it. Transparency isn't a promise. It's a threat to the people who benefit from shadows. And they knew I meant it. 2 months in, I met with the board. They were skeptical. They asked if I had personal biases I couldn't put aside. I told them the truth. Of course I do, but unlike your last VP, I won't hide them behind smiles and surveys. You'll know where I stand, always. Silence. Then, one of them nodded. The others followed. Jessica sent me an email once. Just one line. "You always were good at playing the long game." I never replied. Some things don't deserve closure. Today, Apex is something new. Not perfect, but honest. People speak without fear. The same walls that once echoed with quiet cruelty now carry real conversations. I walk past the same lounge where I lost everything 17 years ago. And now, people listen when I speak. Not because they have to, but because they trust what I say. Revenge didn't give me that. Truth did. 3 months after my return, I found a letter in my office chair. No sender, no envelope, just a folded sheet of thick white paper, the kind used for resumes or wedding invitations. The handwriting was neat, familiar. Be careful what you rebuild. Sometimes the rot is in the soil, not the structure. No signature, no threat, no proof. But I knew it was Jessica. It wasn't just the tone, it was the arrogance, the subtle threat disguised as wisdom. Classic her. I checked the cameras. Nothing. No footage of someone placing it. Either someone on the inside delivered it, or the cameras had been wiped. I didn't report it. Why would I? Let her watch. Let her see how it's actually done. A week later, Camilla forwarded me a blog post. Title, "The Culture Lie: Why Top-Down Reform Fails." It was long, intellectual, almost academic, but it dripped with venom. The author used a pseudonym, but the references, the writing style, unmistakably Jessica. She claimed Apex's new direction was a rebranding exercise led by resentment, accusing the board of placing power in the hands of disgruntled former employees seeking catharsis through policy. She didn't mention me by name, but she didn't have to. The article trended on LinkedIn. I didn't respond. Apex's COO wanted to issue a formal rebuttal. I said no. You don't win by debating ghosts, I told him. You win by staying visible, consistent, and unbothered. But I did one thing in private. I scheduled a team-wide off-site. The location was deliberate. A converted mill house on the edge of a forest. Glass walls, no cell reception. Just notebooks, open schedules, and long walks. I stood in front of 60 team members, most of whom had been burned at some point in their careers. By Apex, by similar companies, by people like Jessica. And I asked a question I never thought I'd ask, in a corporate setting. What would a workplace built on revenge look like? And why is that so easy to imagine? Silence. Then laughter. Nervous at first, then genuine. Someone said, it would probably look a lot like our last one. Another, it'd be all compliance, no compassion. Another, you mean now or before? The honesty opened something. We talked. Not about Q4 goals. Not about retention metrics. We talked about power. About control. About the line between accountability and retribution. And by the end of the weekend, we had something better than a team charter. We had trust. But not everyone liked the new direction. Several senior staff left quietly. Some said the company was getting too emotional. One exec claimed the warrior culture of early Apex was being replaced by therapy circles and journal prompts. Good. Let them leave. The future didn't need them. I got another letter. This one had a return address, a law office. Jessica was suing Apex for wrongful termination and character defamation. I laughed when I read it. Then I got very quiet. Because lawsuits don't scare me. But lawsuits are public. And public means narrative. She was trying to resurrect herself. One final act. We went to mediation. She walked in wearing all white, symbolic, of course. I wore black. Not as a statement, I just prefer it. Her lawyers talked first. They cited emotional trauma, professional assassination, and loss of future earnings. Then my lawyers spoke. They dropped one document. Just one. A written confession from a former intern, dated, signed, notarized. Jessica had forged DEI compliance reports to meet investor milestones. The mediator asked if she wanted to continue. She didn't speak. She just stood up, adjusted her sleeves, and left the room. The case was dismissed before it ever made it to court. The next day, she deleted all her accounts. No more Jessica. Not online, anyway. But she left one final message, a private DM. No hello, no goodbye. Just this. You didn't win. You became me. It stayed with me. I'd love to say I brushed it off. That I laughed. That I felt triumphant. But I didn't. Because in some twisted way, she wasn't entirely wrong. I'd learned her tools, her patience, her precision. But I used them to heal, not to climb. That was the difference. She built her empire to protect her ego. I rebuilt Apex to dismantle fear. And fear is what she always needed to stay in control. By year's end, Apex released a full transparency report, voluntarily. We published every salary band, every complaint stat, every audit. No one asked us to. We just did. Because power without accountability is always the beginning of a lie. And I had lived enough of those to know how they end. 3 weeks after the lawsuit was dismissed, a new problem surfaced. A memo leaked to the press anonymously, accusing Apex of falsifying mental health initiatives to boost public perception. It cited staged interviews, inflated survey results, and falsified timestamps on wellness reports. The language was vicious, specific, smart. Too smart to be random, too detailed to be false. I read it twice before I realized these weren't fabricated events. They were real stories, twisted just enough to seem fake, which meant someone on the inside was feeding Jessica's legacy. I called an emergency meeting. No cameras, no agenda. Just 8 people from the inner circle. And I told them exactly what I thought. "We're not under attack," I said. "We're being shadowed." "What does that mean?" Camila asked. "It means someone's not leaking secrets," I said. "They're rewriting them." Someone was rewriting the truth, just enough to make us look like liars. No need to invent scandals, only reframe the healing as hypocrisy. That's what made it dangerous. Because the best kind of sabotage looks like honesty from the outside. That night, I didn't go home. I stayed at the office, in the dark, reviewing hundreds of Slack threads, meeting transcripts, feedback forms. Patterns emerged. One name kept surfacing. Quietly, at the edges. Michael, our newest DEI coordinator, hired 6 months ago. Harvard grad, soft-spoken, polite. He didn't say much in meetings, always took notes, always nodded. He had never once disagreed with me publicly. But his fingerprints were all over the leaked data, indirectly. He'd requested certain reports, asked questions no one else had, flagged issues that didn't need solving, and somehow always stayed in the background. I waited until morning to call him in. "Michael," I said. "You've been busy." He blinked. "Sorry?" I held up the printed leak. "I know it was you." He paused, then smiled. "I figured it would take you longer." His voice was calm, collected. I asked him why. He sat down without being invited. "Because you built a system around trauma," he said, "and I don't believe in profiting from pain." I stared at him. He continued. "You think Apex is healing people, but what you're really doing is selling redemption." I said nothing. "You talk about justice like it's a spreadsheet, a cycle, a process to manage. But justice," he leaned forward, "isn't quiet. It's not branded. It's not safe." Then he stood up. "You're just the polite version of Jessica." He didn't get fired. I asked him to write a public response. He did. It went viral, but not for the reasons he hoped. People saw it for what it was, a self-righteous rant with no solution. Apex's transparency wasn't perfect, but it was working. We gained 40,000 new subscribers to our newsletter that week. Job applications doubled. Michael deleted his social media within days. And I sat in my office and stared at the wall for almost an hour. Not because I was angry, but because he had almost convinced me. Almost. You see, Michael was right about one thing. I had become the polite version of Jessica. I just knew when to stop. She believed power was something you take. I learned that power, real power, is what you can walk away from. The next company retreat wasn't a retreat at all. It was a funeral. We buried the old Apex. Literally. A time capsule, locked in a steel box. Inside, an employee badge, a printed Slack message that read, "Let's circle back," and a USB filled with all the old HR templates. We buried it under a tree. No press, no photos. Just a circle of people who chose to stay. Not because of perks, but because they believed the past didn't have to repeat. 6 months later, a VC firm offered me $40 million to sell Apex. I declined. Not because I didn't need the money, but because some things aren't built to be flipped. Some things are meant to last. 2 months passed. Apex wasn't in crisis anymore, but something felt unfinished. We were running smoother, sure. Profits were up, press was neutral. Jessica hadn't surfaced again. Michael was gone. But I felt like a man standing on ashes. Not rebuilding, just pretending the fire had never happened. Until one night I found myself walking alone through the old building downtown. The one where I'd first started teaching. The one where Jessica and I had first met. It was condemned now, walls cracking, roof half caved, but the classroom numbers were still on the doors. Room 312. I stood in the doorway, chalkboard still half covered in notes from a decade ago. Conflict drives narrative. I remember writing that. I remember Jessica laughing because I misspelled narrative on the board. Funny how even then, she was rewriting mine. I stayed there for hours. Not to mourn, but to remember the moment before everything turned. Before ambition became armor. Before revenge became routine. Before I learned that silence wasn't peace, it was pressure. And maybe, just maybe, I had been part of the pressure all along. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in years. I taught a class. No cameras, no social media. Just 16 students from a local community program. Some of them had dropped out, some had been expelled. They didn't know my name, didn't care about Apex. I handed them a stack of short stories and said, let's find the anger hiding between the lines. One girl raised her hand. Her voice was soft, but sure. Do we get to write our own stories too? I smiled. That's the only reason we're here. That became the new Apex. We stopped trying to be the voice for victims. We gave them the microphone. No more clean edits. No more curated closure. We built a raw submission platform, anonymous if they wanted, unfiltered, unjudged. Some of the stories were messy. Some were terrifying. Some made people cry. Some made people leave. But they were real. And real always resonates. Our metrics dipped for a while. Advertisers pulled out. The board threatened to resign. I didn't flinch. Because now, for the first time since this began, we weren't reacting. We were leading. And that terrified people used to control. A year after the scandal, Jessica emailed me. No threats, no demands, just a single line. You turned the knife into a pen. I'm not sure if I hate you or admire you. I stared at it for 5 minutes, then deleted it. Not because I was angry, because I didn't need her approval anymore. That's what real closure feels like. Not loud, not final, just quiet. 3 weeks later, I gave my first public speech in over a year. Room packed, cameras on. I walked up to the podium and said, "They tried to bury me in shame. I built a library from the dirt." Silence. Then applause. Then standing ovation. I didn't smile. I just stepped back. Because the moment wasn't mine. It belonged to every voice that had been forced into silence, including mine. Today, I walk the halls of Apex without a title. I'm not the CEO anymore. That job belongs to Camilla now. I don't run the programs. I sit in the back, take notes, occasionally scribble quotes on the wall. I'm just part of the story again, where I belong. Sometimes, I visit room 312. It's still abandoned, but someone painted over the broken board with white chalk. A new sentence. Revenge doesn't rebuild, it reveals. I don't know who wrote it. Maybe Jessica. Maybe one of the students. Maybe someone who heard our story and felt brave enough to finish theirs. Either way, I read it every time. And every time, I nod. Because I know now, the best revenge isn't destroying what hurt you. It's outliving it. 6 months later, a letter arrived at the office. Not an email. An actual letter, hand-addressed, sealed in black wax, no return address. Camilla handed it to me, her brow raised. Inside was a single page. "You don't know me, but your story changed mine. I was ready to give up. Your voice gave mine a reason to scream, I'm not there yet, but I'm standing." No name, no contact info. Just that. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the drawer next to the others. There were dozens now. Each from someone I'd never met. Each from someone who thought they were alone. They weren't. They just hadn't found the page their story belonged on yet. Sometimes, I think about the old Apex. The marble floors. The leather chairs. The cold perfection of our first office. Now, it's nothing like that. Desks are mismatched. Chairs squeak. One of the interns painted a mural on the stairwell that looks like a comic book explosion. But the energy? It's alive. And no one's pretending anymore. That's the real victory. I did run into Jessica again. Not dramatically. No courtroom, no cameras. Just a quiet bookstore in the middle of nowhere. She didn't see me at first. She was reading a copy of a novel I'd recommended to her once, years ago. Before the betrayal, before the chaos. I almost walked away. But then she looked up. And for a moment, there was no fire in her eyes, no threat, no guilt, just a strange kind of peace. She nodded once. I nodded back. And that was it. No words. No apologies. Just acceptance. Not of what had happened, but of what it had made us. Months passed. The project grew. We expanded into prisons. Launched a digital storytelling scholarship for teens kicked out of school systems. Apex wasn't just media anymore. It was movement. Not because I led it, but because I let go. Of the rage, the obsession, the need to win. It wasn't easy. Some nights I still lay awake, wondering if I could have stopped the original implosion. But every morning the answer's the same. No, but I can stop it from happening to someone else. That's enough. One day, a teenage boy walked into one of our workshops and sat in the back. Didn't say a word, didn't write, didn't even look up. But at the end, as we packed up, he handed me a folded napkin. On it, 3 words. "Thank you, Isaac." I didn't know his story. Didn't need to, because I saw it in his eyes. He had one. And now, he knew it mattered. That's how healing works. Not in grand speeches or viral posts, but in small ripples. Moments that don't make headlines, but rewrite lives. They say revenge is about power. But real power is choosing what to build after the fire. I could have become like them. Cold, petty, consumed. But I chose something else. And because of that choice, they lost. Not because I destroyed them, but because I refused to become them. So, if you're listening to this, and you've been betrayed, broken, silenced, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me when it all fell apart. You don't need permission to start over. Your story isn't over until you say it is. And sometimes, the best revenge isn't making them pay. It's making yourself whole again. On your terms. In your voice. No edits. No fear. Just truth. Because truth outlives everything. Even the people who tried to bury it. Months turned into a year. We kept growing. Not just the company, the mission. One morning, Camila walked into the office with a grin on her face. "You're going to want to see this. She turned her laptop to face me. On the screen was an article, front page of a national news site. Whistleblower media company Apex wins Civil Rights Journalism Award. My name wasn't mentioned, but our work was. Our impact. And that was all I'd ever wanted. We started getting calls from universities, inviting us to speak. At first, I declined. Public recognition still made me uncomfortable. But one day I agreed. Camilla insisted on coming along. As we waited backstage, she leaned over and whispered, "You were never just a teacher. You were always something more." I looked out at the crowd. Young faces. Old ones. People holding notebooks, recorders, curiosity. I stepped up to the microphone and took a breath. "My name is Isaac," I began, "and I lost everything." Silence. Then, but in losing everything, I found myself. Afterward, a student approached me, shaking. She was barely 19, wearing oversized sleeves and holding a tattered notebook. She opened it and pointed to a line scribbled in the corner. "They can burn my house down, but they can't erase my words." "I wrote this the night I found your video," she said. "I was going to do something terrible that night, but I didn't, because of you." I didn't know what to say. So I hugged her. And for the first time in years, I cried in public. Not from pain, from release. People started telling their stories. About bosses who mocked them. Schools that failed them. Families that silenced them. They sent audio recordings, typed letters, video clips. We didn't filter them for perfection, only for truth. And we published every one. Sometimes anonymously. Sometimes with names attached, boldly, defiantly. The channel grew. Not viral, not flashy, but real, honest, and unstoppable. Then one day, the most unexpected message of all arrived. From Lucas, my old student, the one who'd stood up for me years ago. He was in law school now. Attached was a short video. In it, he stood in front of a classroom saying, "This class exists because one teacher showed me the truth matters, even when it costs you everything. So if you're scared of speaking up, speak anyway. It'll echo farther than you think." I watched that clip 5 times. And for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Peace. I still have nightmares. Still wake up some nights feeling like I'm back in that staff room. Accused. Alone. Ashamed. But I don't stay there anymore. Now I get up, drink a glass of water, and walk into my study. And I write. One sentence at a time. Not because I'm healed, but because healing is a process. And revenge? Real revenge isn't about making them cry. It's about making you rise. One of our editors once asked me what Apex really meant. Not the company, the word. I told her, it's the point where 2 slopes meet, the highest peak before the descent. She smiled. Then let's never stop climbing. We didn't. Then came the call I never expected. A new startup, funded by survivors of workplace abuse, offered to buy Apex. 7 figures. Complete creative control retained. No strings. I said no. Camila looked at me like I was insane. You realize how rare that is, right? I nodded. But I wasn't building this for money. Not anymore. I was building this for the ones still whispering. The ones still afraid. And for the kid I used to be. The one who thought silence was safer. Years later, they wrote about us in a book called Apex, one of the most emotionally intelligent movements in digital storytelling. They asked for a quote. I sent one sentence. We were just telling the truth louder than the lies. And now? Now I wake up every morning with purpose. Not to destroy, but to build. To remind the world that stories have teeth, and that sometimes The softest voice, when it speaks with truth, can shake the walls of the most powerful room. You're not broken. You're becoming. Every betrayal, every scar, every setback, it's shaping you. You don't have to forgive. You don't have to forget. But you can rise. And that's the kind of revenge they'll never see coming. 6 months passed. Apex was thriving. Our reach expanded across borders. We had volunteers, researchers, even ex-journalists quietly joining the mission. But one morning, something odd happened. Camilla knocked on my office door, holding a thick white envelope. "No return address," she said. "Hand-delivered." Inside was a letter, typed. No signature, but I knew the voice behind it instantly. "Isaac, you think you've won, but you don't know what game you were playing. You burned our castle, but it was already crumbling. We're building a new one where your name has no weight. Let this be your final chapter, or we'll write the next one for you." Camilla stared at me. "What does it mean?" I smiled. "A warning," I said, "or maybe an invitation." I didn't respond. Instead, I did something bolder. I published the letter, word for word, as our next feature. No context, no commentary. Just a title. "Read this before they silence it." The views exploded. Not because people knew who wrote it, but because they recognized the fear behind it. And in that fear, they saw truth. And in that truth, they found courage. 2 days later, I got a call. Private number. I didn't answer the first 3 times. 4th time, I picked up. A voice I hadn't heard in years. Principal Hayes. "I read your article," he said flat. Silence. Then, "You're not the man I tried to destroy." "No," I replied. "I'm the man who survived it." Another pause. Then, something I never expected. "I want to help." I didn't believe him at first, but then he sent over a folder. Digital scans, hundreds of internal memos from the district, falsified reports, suppressed complaints, names of teachers, students, victims, but most importantly, villains, some of whom were still in power. Camilla and I stared at each other. "We publish?" she asked. I nodded. "But not as revenge," I said, "as record." We didn't just publish the documents. We launched a new series, The Archive of the Silenced. Each story included real names when permitted, real timelines, and, where possible, real justice updates. Within a month, 3 school board members resigned. Within 6 months, 2 were under investigation. But more than that, people started talking. Really talking. We got submissions from nurses, factory workers, airline pilots, tech developers, janitors. No one was immune to injustice. But now, they weren't invisible either. And then, the twist no one expected. A national documentary crew reached out. They wanted to make a series based on Apex's journey. We hesitated. Fame was never the goal. But they said something that changed our mind. "This story isn't about you anymore. It's about what you unlocked." Filming began. But there was one thing they didn't know. Something even Camilla didn't know. The name Apex wasn't just a metaphor. It was a code word. Back in the early days, before we even launched, I embedded a kill switch in the company's structure. A legal clause. If the mission ever lost integrity, if it became about money, ego, politics, the company would dissolve automatically. No board vote, no override. Just vanish. The final revenge against corruption itself. I've never used it, never needed to, because somehow, against all odds, we stayed pure. The story didn't consume us. It freed us. Last month, we opened our first physical space. Not a studio, a library. A living archive, where every story ever submitted is printed, bound, and shelved. You don't need a membership. You don't need ID. You just walk in and read. There's a quote on the wall as you enter. It reads, "Some people leave behind riches. We leave behind truth." If you're still wondering how it all ended, it didn't. Because justice isn't a chapter. It's a continuum. And some of us, we were born to write the parts no one else dares to.
If that hit you deep, imagine what's coming next.
Subscribe, like, and welcome to Taste of Revenge,